A billionaire is dead, and his family gathers to claim their fortune. But this is no ordinary will. Hidden in its pages is a secret clause that hands the entire empire to the daughter he despised most. The catch? She must solve the one mystery the family buried 20 years ago: the disappearance of her own mother. Stay until the end to find out how a last will and testament becomes the key to unlocking a terrible crime and destroying a legacy of lies. The hidden truth. The secret clause that unraveled everything. The prologue. The legacy of Elias Thorne. Imagine a gray autumn morning, the kind of day that seems to suck the color from the world, leaving everything in shades of sepia and melancholy. In the imposing Thorne Mansion, a monument of Gothic Victorian architecture looming over the New England landscape, the air was heavy, not just with the season's dampness, but with recent grief and a palpable tension. Elias Thorne, the patriarch, was dead, a man whose life was a complex tapestry of genius and tyranny, of charity and cruelty. He built a pharmaceutical empire from nothing, a legacy of billions, but he did it with an iron fist and a heart that few dared to question. His death, though expected after a long illness, brought no peace, but rather a feverish anticipation. The anticipation of the reading of the will. Elias Thorne was no ordinary man. He was an enigma, a master manipulator who enjoyed playing with people's emotions and expectations, especially those of his own family. His fortune was vast, but his relationships were a minefield. He had 3 children, each with their own hopes and fears regarding the inheritance. Isabella, the eldest, an elegant and ambitious woman who dedicated her life to pleasing her father, dreaming of taking control of the empire. Marcus, the middle son, a brilliant but reclusive academic who always avoided the family business, seeking solace in books and research. And Clara, the youngest, a free and rebellious spirit who had broken with her father years ago, refusing to live under his controlling shadow. That morning, the 3 siblings, along with Elias's widow, Eleanor Thorne, a woman of ethereal beauty and mystery who married Elias in his final years, arousing everyone's suspicion, were gathered in the mansion's library. The dark oak furniture, the shelves filled with ancient volumes, and the smell of leather and old paper created a solemn atmosphere. But the solemnity was just a facade for the greed and anxiety simmering beneath the surface. All eyes were fixed on Mr. Alistair Finch, the family lawyer, a man of grave countenance and impeccable reputation, who held in his hands a leather-bound document, the last will and testament of Elias Thorne. No one knew what to expect. Elias was known for his eccentricities, and his final act would be no different. But what no one could have predicted was that, hidden among the usual clauses, was a truth so explosive it threatened to dismantle not just the fortune, but the very history of the Thorne family. Get ready, because this is the story of how the lawyer read the will, but the secret clause exposed the truth and left everyone in shock. The heirs and their expectations. To understand the impact of the secret clause, it's crucial to understand who Elias Thorne's heirs were and what each expected from that will. Elias's fortune wasn't just money, it was power, status, a legacy that could shape the future of anyone who possessed it. Isabella Thorne. The eldest, Isabella, was a mirror image of her father's ambition, but with a layer of polish and charm Elias never possessed. From a young age, she was groomed for business, sitting in on board meetings before she even finished college. She was Elias's favorite, the one he trusted with the reins of his most complex operations. Isabella saw the inheritance as hers by right, the acknowledgement of years of loyalty and hard work. She dreamed of expanding the Thorne empire, taking it to new heights, and would not tolerate anything or anyone standing in her way. Her eyes, though filled with sadness at her father's death, gleamed with the expectation of even greater power. Marcus Thorne. The middle son, Marcus, was the opposite of Isabella and his father. A reclusive intellectual, he found his refuge in books and scientific research. He was a brilliant geneticist, but his passion was far from the corporate world. Elias had always considered him a disappointment, a waste of potential. Marcus, in turn, saw the family fortune as a burden, a source of conflict and corruption. He hoped for a modest sum that would allow him to fund his research and live a quiet life, far from the shadow of the Thorn Empire. His presence at the reading was more out of obligation than interest, but a part of him hoped his father, in his final act, might have recognized his worth in some way. Clara Thorn. The youngest, Clara, was the family's rebellious soul. She had broken with Elias years ago after a heated argument over her desire to become an artist and social activist. Elias had emotionally disinherited her, cutting off all financial support and refusing to acknowledge her choices. Clara, however, thrived on her independence, building a meaningful life away from the family's toxicity. She was present at the reading only out of respect for her mother's memory, who had passed away years earlier, and out of a morbid curiosity about what her complex father might have reserved for her. She expected nothing, and perhaps for that reason, she was more open to any surprise. Eleanor Thorn. The widow, Eleanor, was the most enigmatic figure in the room. She married Elias just 5 years before his death, a marriage that shocked society and aroused the suspicion of his children. Eleanor was young, beautiful, and possessed a disturbing calm. No one knew much about her past, and she rarely spoke of herself. Elias's children saw her as a gold digger, an intruder who had taken advantage of their father's fragility. Eleanor, however, maintained an impeccable composure, her blue eyes observing everyone with a serenity that bordered on indifference. Her expectation was clear, a substantial part of the fortune, which would guarantee her a life of luxury and freedom. But there was something else in her gaze, something that suggested a hidden depth, a secret of her own. Each of them, with their own histories, ambitions, and resentments, was about to have their expectations turned upside down. Elias Thorn's will was not just a legal document. It was one last game, one final manipulation, designed to expose the true nature of his family. The reading of the will. The first surprises, Mr. Alistair Finch, with his deep and methodical voice, began the reading. The silence in the library was almost deafening, broken only by the rustling of pages and the occasional sound of a held breath. The first clauses were, as expected, a demonstration of Elias's vast fortune. Large sums were designated for renowned charities, some of which the family didn't even know Elias supported. Properties were bequeathed to loyal employees, some of whom had dedicated decades of their lives to the Thorn Empire, and whose names were unknown to the children themselves. Isabella, impatient, could barely contain her anxiety. She awaited her share, the recognition of her place as the rightful heir. Marcus, for his part, listened with distant curiosity, waiting for the mention of his modest inheritance. Clara, with her arms crossed, observed the scene with an amused skepticism, expecting nothing from her father. Eleanor, the widow, maintained her impassive expression, but her eyes followed the lawyer's every word with calculated intensity. Then, Mr. Finch arrived at the part everyone was waiting for, the division of the fortune among the children. Isabella, with a victorious smile, felt a wave of relief. She received what she considered hers by right, the largest share of the pharmaceutical empire, control of the main subsidiaries, and a substantial sum of cash. She was already imagining expansion plans, acquisitions, the way she would shape her father's legacy in her own image. Marcus, to his surprise, received a considerably larger amount than he expected, along with the donation of a state-of-the-art research laboratory and a foundation to fund his genetic studies. His eyes, usually distant, shone with a mixture of shock and gratitude. It was as if Elias, on his deathbed, had finally recognized the value of his more intellectual son. Clara, in turn, received a secluded country estate with a large art studio and a fund to support emerging artists. It wasn't money, but it was freedom and the opportunity to continue her passion, something she valued more than any fortune. She felt a lump in her throat, a pang of emotion she didn't expect to feel for her father. Eleanor, the widow, received the Thorne mansion, a generous sum of money, and a minority stake in the companies. It was a substantial inheritance, but not the total control Isabella had feared she would seek. Eleanor's expression remained unchanged, but a slight glint in her eyes suggested she was satisfied. The will so far seemed a fair, if surprising, distribution, reflecting the complexity of Elias Thorne. But then Mr. Finch paused. A pause that was far too long. He turned to the last page of the document, a page that seemed to be blank, or perhaps held only a few lines. The room fell into absolute silence. Isabella's eyes widened. Marcus frowned in confusion. Clara felt a shiver down her spine. Eleanor, for the first time, showed a flicker of surprise. Something was wrong. Something was about to change everything. The secret clause. The first shock. Mr. Finch cleared his throat again, adjusting his glasses. His eyes, usually so controlled, revealed a hint of nervousness. "And now," he began, his voice a little lower, "we come to Clause 7b, a clause that Mr. Thorne insisted be kept in absolute secrecy until this moment." A murmur went through the room. Clause 7b? No one had heard of such a thing. Isabella, with her sharp business mind, was already analyzing the implications. Marcus looked intrigued. Clara, who had braced herself for indifference, felt her curiosity sharpen. Eleanor, for her part, maintained a calm that was almost supernatural. The lawyer began to read, and each word fell like a stone into the silence of the library. "And lastly, to the person who, throughout my life, has demonstrated the true essence of integrity, courage, and unwavering loyalty, not to me, but to the principles I failed to uphold, I leave the entirety of the controlling shares of Thorne Pharmaceuticals, along with the responsibility to uncover and rectify the past mistakes that have stained our family's name. This person, and only this person, will have the power to rewrite history and restore the honor that was lost. And this person is..." Elias Thorne seemed to have scripted a dramatic pause, as if he were present in the room, savoring the suspense. "My daughter, Clara Thorne." The shock was seismic. Isabella, who moments before had been radiant with her inheritance, turned pale. Her eyes widened in disbelief, then in fury. "Clara?" she screamed, her voice a mixture of outrage and betrayal. "That's impossible. She has no experience. She abandoned us." Marcus, who was drinking a glass of water, choked. He looked at Clara, then at the lawyer, then at his sister, a mixture of surprise and confusion on his face. Clara, for her part, was in shock. Her eyes were fixed on the lawyer, her mind trying to process the words she had just heard. She, the rebel daughter, the disappointment, had been given control of the empire she so despised. Eleanor, the widow, broke her composure. A flash of anger and disappointment crossed her face, quickly replaced by a calculating expression. She had underestimated Elias and underestimated Clara. The lawyer, meanwhile, remained calm, but his eyes, for a brief moment, met Clara's, and there was a hint of something that looked like pride. "But there is a condition," Mr. Finch continued, and silence reigned once more. "For Clara to assume control, she must, within 1 year, solve the true mystery behind the disappearance of Lily Thorne." The name echoed in the room like thunder. Lily Thorne. Clara's mother, Elias's first wife, who had mysteriously disappeared years ago, an event the family had swept under the rug. The secret clause wasn't just about the fortune, it was about the truth, and that truth promised to be far more shocking than anyone could imagine. The mystery of Lily Thorne. A dark past. The name Lily Thorne hung in the air, heavy with years of silence and speculation. For Isabella and Marcus, it was a painful memory of a mother they barely knew, an ethereal figure who vanished without a trace. For Clara, it was an open wound, the reason for her estrangement from Elias and her search for justice. For Eleanor, it was a name she had heard in whispers, but whose full story she did not know. Lily Thorne was a woman ahead of her time. A brilliant scientist, she was instrumental in the founding of Thorne Pharmaceuticals, working side by side with Elias in the company's early years. She was the mind behind many of the innovations that made the company a success. But unlike Elias, Lily was guided by ethics and morals. She believed science should serve humanity, not profit. And it was this belief that put her on a collision course with Elias. Lily's disappearance over 20 years ago was a scandal Elias managed to quash with his influence and money. The official story was that she had run off with a lover, abandoning her family. But Clara never believed that story. She remembered her mother as a strong, dedicated woman, incapable of such an act. She remembered heated arguments between her parents, whispers of secrets and threats, and she remembered her father's coldness after Lily's disappearance, a coldness that seemed more like relief than grief. The secret clause in Elias's will was not just a challenge for Clara, it was a confession. Elias, on his deathbed, was finally admitting there was more to Lily's disappearance. And he was tasking Clara, the only daughter he had emotionally disinherited, with uncovering the truth. Why? Was it an act of redemption? Or one last manipulation, a final game to expose the true nature of his family? Clara, with the reluctant help of Marcus, who, despite his aversion to the family business, felt a pang of scientific curiosity and a desire to honor his mother's memory, began her investigation. They dove into Elias's files, Lily's diaries, and the old newspaper reports Elias had suppressed. They discovered Lily was working on groundbreaking research that could revolutionize medicine, but also threatened the interests of large pharmaceutical corporations, including Thorne Pharmaceuticals itself. She had discovered a cure for a rare disease, but this cure was natural and unpatentable, making it a threat to Elias's business model. Isabella, for her part, was furious. The idea of Clara, the black sheep, taking control of the company was unbearable. She began her own investigation, not to help Clara, but to find a way to disqualify her, to prove she was incapable of fulfilling the will's condition. Eleanor, the widow, watched everything with a disguised interest, but her own secrets were beginning to surface, revealing an unexpected connection to Elias and Lily's past. The web of lies, revelations, and betrayals. The investigation led Clara and Marcus down a dangerous path, unraveling a complex web of lies, betrayals, and secrets that stretched back decades. They discovered that Lily's disappearance was not an escape, but a kidnapping, orchestrated by Elias to stop her from revealing her research and exposing the unethical practices of Thorne Pharmaceuticals. Elias, in his relentless pursuit of power and profit, had silenced the woman he supposedly loved. But the truth was even darker. They found that Elias did not act alone. There were accomplices, people within the company, and even the family who helped him cover up the crime. One of these accomplices was Mr. Finch himself, the family lawyer. He had been forced by Elias to manipulate documents and create the narrative of Lily's escape, under the threat of having his own family destroyed. The look of pride Clara had seen in Finch's eyes during the reading was not for her, but for Elias, who in his final act had given Clara the chance to redeem the family name, and indirectly, Finch's. Isabella, in her own investigation to disqualify Clara, ended up unearthing the same truths. The shock of discovering her father's true nature and the extent of his cruelty shook her to the core. She realized her entire life had been built on a lie, that the empire she so coveted was stained with her own mother's blood. Her ambition began to give way to a sense of justice, and she found herself at a crossroads: protect her father's legacy or expose the truth, even if it meant the family's ruin. Eleanor, the widow, also had her secrets. She was not just a gold digger, she was Lily's younger sister, who had been separated from her in childhood. Elias had found and manipulated her into marrying him, using her as a form of control and a way to keep Lily's secret buried. Eleanor had accepted the marriage out of desperation and a promise from Elias that one day she would learn the truth about her sister. She was playing her own game, waiting for the right moment to unravel the mystery of Lily and get her revenge on Elias. The web of lies was coming apart, and each revelation brought with it a new layer of pain and betrayal. The Thorne family, which seemed so united in its greed, was about to be torn apart by the truth. The final confrontation. The truth revealed. The one-year deadline was closing in. Clara, Marcus, and surprisingly Isabella had gathered all the evidence. They had found the location where Lily had been held captive, a secret lab hidden on a remote property owned by Elias. They had found Lily's diaries, which detailed her research and the terror of her captivity. And they had found Elias's confession, recorded on an old tape recorder where he admitted his crimes and expressed a late-stage regret. The final confrontation took place in the same library where the will had been read. Clara called an emergency meeting with Mr. Finch, Eleanor, and the board members of Thorne Pharmaceuticals. She was no longer nervous. Her eyes shone with a cold determination. She began to present the evidence, one piece at a time, with the help of Marcus, who explained the scientific details of Lily's research, and Isabella, who, to everyone's shock, corroborated the financial information and her father's illegal maneuvers. Mr. Finch, his voice choked with emotion, confessed his role in the cover-up, explaining Elias's threats and his own remorse. Eleanor, with tears in her eyes, revealed her true identity as Lily's sister and her quest for revenge. The room was in shock. The board members, who had been passive accomplices or ignorant of Elias's crimes, were pale. The truth, raw and unfiltered, was laid bare for all to see. Elias Thorne was not the genius they thought. He was a criminal, a tyrant who had destroyed his own family in his quest for power. The fallout was devastating. The reputation of Thorne Pharmaceuticals crumbled. The stock plummeted. Federal investigations were opened, and Elias's accomplices were arrested. The Thorne family fortune, which had seemed so unshakable, was in ruins. But the most shocking revelation of all was the fate of Lily Thorne. She had not run off with a lover. She had been held captive by Elias for years, until her death, in an effort to silence her and steal her research. The truth was a knife, and it had cut deep. Redemption and the new legacy. With the truth exposed and the empire of lies dismantled, the Thorne family, or what was left of it, began a painful process of redemption. Clara, as the new controller of Thorne Pharmaceuticals, did not seek profit. She used her position to reform the company from the inside out, transforming it into an ethical and transparent institution focused on the research and development of accessible cures for all. She honored her mother's legacy, ensuring that Lily's research was finally published and used for the good of humanity. Marcus, with his passion for science, became the head of the research department at the new Thorne Pharmaceuticals, dedicating his life to continuing his mother's work and ensuring that science was used for good. Isabella, in an act of deep contrition, renounced all her positions in the company and dedicated her life to social causes, using her intelligence and skills to help the less fortunate, seeking redemption for her own blindness and ambition. Eleanor, the widow, found peace in finally solving the mystery of her sister. She used her inheritance to create a foundation in Lily's name, dedicated to supporting women in science and fighting against corporate corruption. The Thorne Mansion, once a symbol of greed and secrets, was transformed into a center for research and innovation, a place where truth and ethics were valued above all else. The Thorne family, though diminished in number and fortune, found a new identity built on honesty and the pursuit of justice. The epilogue. The truth sets you free. The story of the secret clause in Elias Thorne's will became a legend about how the truth, no matter how deeply buried, always finds a way to the light. Clara, the rebel daughter who was emotionally disinherited, became the unexpected hero, the guardian of truth and the restorer of her family's honor. She proved that a true legacy is not built on material wealth, but on integrity and the courage to face the shadows of the past. The Thorn case became a case study in law and business schools, a grim reminder of the dangers of unchecked greed and the importance of ethics. Thorn Pharmaceuticals, under Clara's leadership, flourished again, not as an empire of billions, but as a beacon of hope and innovation, a testament to the power of redemption. And so, the story of Elias Thorn, the man who tried to control everything, ended with his own truth being exposed by his daughter. The secret clause was not just a condition for the inheritance, it was a final plea for forgiveness, an attempt by Elias on his deathbed to right the wrongs of a lifetime. And Clara, by unraveling the mystery of her mother, inherited not just a fortune, but also freedom from a dark past and the opportunity to build a future based on truth and justice. If you know a story of family secrets that need to be revealed, or if you've been a victim of a hidden truth, share your experience in the comments. We believe every story has the power to inspire and transform. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that will surprise you and make you reflect on the true meaning of family, legacy, and the unshakable power of the truth.